Wednesday edition PFT PM, Charean Williams, Mike Florio, and your questions. And, I understand we've been asking for questions 2 or 3 times a week, and sometimes we don't have time to really answer many of them. Well, today we do, and we're going to get right to it. Charean, at KVARP23 has this question via Twitter. Who is the most underrated player on the Pittsburgh Steelers defense? Charean, your thoughts?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is fairly obvious. I think it's Tyson Alualu, the nose tackle. After they lost Javon Hargrave to the Eagles in the offseason, he's become the primary nose, and he's a big reason, really no pun intended here, that their run defense is number 2 overall. But he's actually done more than that. He has a sack. He's affected the quarterback, 13 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. He's really been a big part of that defense, and I think an underrated part of that defense. We always talk about the outside guys because they're the ones who get the sacks and the quarterback pressures and all of that sort of stuff, and they've been great, no doubt about it, but they get enough pub. This guy on the inside is doing the dirty work and getting it done.
Yeah, and when they lost Hargrave to the Eagles, there was some thought that maybe they wouldn't have a classic nose tackle, that they were in the process of shifting toward more of a 4-3 look than a 3-4 look without that traditional nose tackle. Alualu has been very good for them. He was the first-round pick of the Jaguars way back in 2010. I'm going to go with Cameron Hayward, though, because I think, number one, he's awesome, and number two, he gets lost in the shuffle. Pittsburgh defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, typically get lost in the shuffle because it's the linebackers that get the sacks and make the tackles for the most part. The way the system is set up, those guys in the middle just clog up the line and grind away and don't have the statistical achievement that gets them the attention. Yeah, every once in a while, a ball's going to pop up in the air and Cameron Hayward's going to catch it. But for the most part, it's the Bud Duprees and the TJ Watts who get the notoriety, and it's the guys grinding away in that front wall that don't. And Hayward's a great leader, captain of the defense, longtime member of the team. He was a first-round pick in 2011, the son of Ironhead Hayward, a Pittsburgh legend. And I just think he means a hell of a lot to that team, so much more that they don't quite even realize it, and they won't realize it until he's no longer playing. And it was smart of them to get him signed to an extension earlier this year, Charean.
And, Mike, you know what? I think one big thing, too, talking about an absence, I think people are going to realize how much Devin Bush meant to that defense. His loss is a huge one. And I was talking to a different scout, an AFC scout last night, and he talked about really how much Devin Bush meant to that defense. And they're going to have a hard time replacing him. And I think we're going to see. It's not that he's underrated, and I wouldn't list him as underrated because he was getting a lot of publicity, but he was a really integral part of that defense. And they still have the guys up front, but I do think they're going to miss him some.
Here's a great question from Papa PWN on Twitter. Pick a team under 500 from each conference to make the playoffs. Let's start with the NFC. Charean, do you have one in mind?
Well, I think there's 2 obvious candidates, right? Somebody has to win the East, I think, unless they change the rules, which they probably should do. And that's either the Eagles or the Cowboys. And I just think the Cowboys have had too many injuries. And I hope that Andy Dalton doesn't get killed this week, but with the offensive line that they're going to throw out there, there's a good chance that his life is in danger against this Washington defensive line, which we know is very good. And because of all their injuries, I just don't think they're going to win the division. I think it's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm going to pick the Eagles to make the playoffs by default. I don't know that they'll end up with a winning record, but because they win the East, they'll get in the postseason and be one and done.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've seen this movie the past couple of years from the Eagles where they start slowly, they figure it out, and I think it's going to be easier this year to figure it out. The one caveat would be if Washington flips to Alex Smith and commits to him for the rest of the season, maybe they have a chance to pull themselves back into it. But for now, I'm going to say Philadelphia Eagles. I agree with you on that. How about in the AFC, a team under 500 that you think can make the playoffs?
Well, I think the answer is obvious, and it's the New England Patriots because, they're sitting there at 2-3, but they're 13th on offense and 9th on defense. And you just think that this is going to be a team that's going to get better and better considering the practices that they missed over the last couple of weeks because of the COVID issues. I just think they're going to be good, and they're going to be there at the end. I think they're going to end up with a winning record because the Patriots always end up with a winning record. They always get to 10 wins. Maybe they don't get to 10 wins, but I think certainly they get to 9 wins. And the other team I think you would kind of sort of look at simply because they were without their quarterback for a couple, and that's the Denver Broncos. I think they could get back and possibly be a factor in that last playoff berth.
And they're the only two teams that are at 2-3. The other teams below 500 in the AFC, and there are 5 of them, have 1 win or fewer. And overall, there are 10 teams right now in the NFL with 1 win or fewer. And one of the concerns we need to keep an eye on, because I know the league is worried about this, as teams slip out of contention, will they become less concerned about avoiding COVID-19 infections or outbreaks? Because we're done. It's over. We're not going to the playoffs. The one thing the players need to remember, if you don't play games, you're not getting paid. So that's reason alone to stay as healthy as you can. But they're very concerned about teams that no longer are playing for anything being as careful as they need to be about staying away from COVID-19. I agree with you that the Patriots are the team most likely to turn it around. I think the longer they play together, the better they're going to be. And the question is, going on the road in the postseason, can they beat some of these teams? And I think of the best teams in the AFC right now, the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Titans, and the Steelers, I think the last team they want to see and in their initial playoff game would be the New England Patriots.
Yeah, no question, because you know what Bill Belichick can do, and he's going to put together a great game plan. And yes, maybe they're not going to go win the division. Maybe they're not going to be the top seed in the postseason. But for one game, I don't want to play Bill Belichick.
James 90638-219. Typically, I beware the name with a bunch of numbers afterward. But in this case, we'll assume not a bot, not a troll, and we'll answer James' question. When is AB signing? Picked him up on my fantasy team. Hey, James 90638-219. Nobody cares about your fantasy team. We'll still answer the question. Charean, who do you think he signs with and when?
Well, you know, Seattle, as Pete Carroll said today, is always in on these things. So I don't know that Seattle particularly needs him. And that's the problem. If you bring him into your locker room, you know, you've got DK Metcalf, you've got Tyler Lockett. Is he going to be divisive because he's not getting the ball all the time? And this is a guy that only played 1 game last year and now hasn't played yet this year. So we know he stays in great shape. There's no question about that. But just not having that game action, is he still going to demand the ball despite having not played? So I look at Seattle just because they're always in on these things. But, you know, other than that, I don't know. I don't know that anybody else is just going to be jumping up and down to sign AB.
You need to have coaching staff and or team leaders that will ensure that Antonio Brown is deferential and doesn't cause problems. And he needs to be on a one-strike arrangement where if he does cause a problem, out he goes. Last year, the Seahawks were interested in him and Josh Gordon. They signed Josh Gordon. He got suspended. They've signed him back onto the team. He hasn't been cleared yet. So I could see why they'd be interested in Antonio Brown. And I'm fascinated by the possibility of some of these NFC contenders trying to box each other out to get Antonio Brown, because you don't want him to go to the Seahawks. You can get him and keep him from another team. And Tom Brady has wanted him. He's made no bones about it. With all the injuries in Tampa, how do you continue to resist the argument that you should add Antonio Brown? Because they never have the full complement of pass catchers. So put Antonio Brown on the team. I know Bruce Arians wants nothing to do with him based on their 2 years in Pittsburgh, however. And we'll see who's really got the juice in Tampa. If they do go after Antonio Brown, then maybe it is Tom Brady's team in 2020 and possibly beyond. Last question. At Robert Fenbers, why are the Cleveland Browns fan base and media acting like the team is 2-4 instead of 4-2, Charean?
It's the Brown syndrome. We have it at Texas A&M. We call it the Aggie syndrome. You're just so beaten down, right? I mean, 2002 was their last playoff berth. 2007 was their last winning record. Even longer than that they won the division. I mean, it's just year after year after year that this team loses. And so you get used to them losing, and we all just wait for them to collapse. And I also think that the jury's still out on Baker Mayfield, right? I mean, we don't know what he is. I don't think the Browns know what he is. And he stunk it up the other day, and I'm sure the rib played a part in the way he played, but he just has not gotten it done the way that we think he should get it done. So I just think it's the history there. It's a graveyard for quarterbacks, and they just haven't been good.
I think the problem, too, is when they come up against a really good team, they get smacked down. They lost 38-6 to the Ravens week 1 and then 38-7 to the Steelers week 6. They need to show that they can contend with a great team. Now, they're fortunate. There's only really 3 great teams left on the schedule, the Titans, the Ravens, and the Steelers. The Raiders are kind of in between. There are 6 games they should win. And to their credit, they have figured out how to win the games they should win. I think 10 wins is very possible. But what's going to happen? 6 seed, 7 seed, go on the road week 1 of the postseason and get smacked down by somebody. So that's what I think is causing people to be concerned about the Browns at 4-2.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.